the unresolved legacy of Northern Ireland's past, so that communities can reconcile and heal. That is what the command paper that we will publish today sets out, and I would suggest the Honourable Lady has a look at that to see that some of the issues that she has raised are issues we've been talking to people about and issues that we cover in that command paper. Clearly, as I've said before, anything we do, we are determined to ensure is Article 2 compliant. And I would just point out to the Honourable Lady, she used the reference of Operation Canova, which has done excellent work working with victims and families to get to the bottom of truth. In the 4 or 5 years that's been functioning, of course, no prosecutions. But there is a model in Operation Canova about how these things can work, and it's a very clear indication how you can get to information in a way as we move forward. And that's the kind of process that I think would be constructive for us to be looking at and dealing with. And I would just say to the Honourable Lady, in terms of Stormont House, it is increasingly clear, and I've been frank with the House about that in my opening remarks, that any approach to dealing with the legacy of the past that focuses on criminal investigations will be unlikely to deliver the outcomes that people hope for. There is a point at which we in this House need to be honest with people about the very painful, difficult reality of where we are today, and as cases that we've seen recently have shown us. And that is probably why one of the previous police ombudsmen of Northern Ireland themselves made the comment that some of those things were simply unworkable. And we are also very clear that we will never accept any moral equivalence between those who upheld the law in Northern Ireland, who served their country, and those on all sides who sought to destroy it. And I would just gently say to the Honourable Lady that while she stands here and talks about engagement, some of the people that she has criticised as not engaging with, in fact we were engaging with just last week, along a wide range of engagement that has gone over the last 18 months and will continue. This is intended, this paper, as part of the talks that are ongoing at the moment and will continue in the weeks ahead. And in light of not hearing from the Honourable Lady a single thing about what the Labour Party would propose as a way forward, I would finish as I did in my opening statement with a quote. Instead of releasing the sort of politics that can ensure the success of the Good Friday Agreement, the party is an obstacle to progressive political development. That's a quote from Boyd Black, today the Secretary of the Labour Party in Northern Ireland.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement enabled peace to come to Northern Ireland and opened up the prospect of a much brighter future for that part of the United Kingdom. But does my right honourable friend agree that young people today and future generations will only be able to enjoy that brighter future if Northern Ireland can find a path to reconciliation and is able to address and, crucially, move on from the legacy of the past?
Yeah. So state.
Yes, my right honourable friend, who I know has had a great interest in Northern Ireland for many, many years, is absolutely right. It cannot be right that 23 years on from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, still only some 7% of children in Northern Ireland are able to enjoy integrated education. If we want to see society move forward, we need to be clear and honest with ourselves about there is much more work to do on that. And she is absolutely right. We need to end the intergenerational trauma that we are seeing and find a way to help Northern Ireland move forward in the future so that the next generation and today's younger generation can look forward whilst always understanding where we've come from and what has happened, but have the ability to look forward.
Richard Thompson, SNP spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I associate myself with your remarks at the start of this session about the unfortunate way that this information has entered into the public domain. However it is, and while I thank that happened, and while I thank the Secretary of State for the advance sight of his statement, we shouldn't be reading these things on the BBC and RTE websites before we're able to discuss them in the House. Mr Speaker, allow me to acknowledge first of all, the untidy and imperfect nature of some of the compromises that have had to be made over the decades. First of all, to achieve peace in Northern Ireland and then to maintain it. But whatever merits there might be in principle in proposals surrounding aspects of truth, reconciliation and ensuring that the hidden truths of the Troubles are at last able to be told while it's still possible to do so, there still remain huge concerns about the lack of formal consultation and engagement that there appears to have been over these proposals. Could I ask the Secretary of State, does he understand the huge concern and the unease and the upset that these proposals for a statute of limitations will cause, not just across Northern Ireland, but right across these islands? Will he acknowledge that unease and commit to engage with victims groups and political leaders to discuss the way forward? And will he also think again about that statute of limitations and find a way to ensure that whatever final proposals he brings forward to this House that wherever independent prosecutors consider that there is a sufficiency of evidence, a likelihood of successful conviction, and where, importantly, they also independently judge that it is in the public interest to bring forward a prosecution, that they will still be able to do so.
Sheriff State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say to the honourable gentleman, I absolutely agree with him around the issue around making sure that we're able to get to the truth, get to information. We cannot, nobody in this House can ever want to see again a situation where, as we have done recently with the families in the Ballymurphy case, have had to wait 50 years to get to the truth. We've got to find a better way forward. The current system is failing everybody. So to do nothing simply isn't an option that is going to deliver for people in Northern Ireland. And he's absolutely right. We do want to engage. We have been engaging, not just over the last 18 months, but even just last week, myself and my officials engaging with victims groups on these very issues. And in the weeks ahead, with this command paper, for people to be able to read through, look at and get engaged with, that engagement will continue, as well as with the political parties and indeed our partners in the Irish Government.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Simon Hoare. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend should be commended for trying once again, as others have tried, to resolve legacy. And as we do so, can we resolve not to use the language, I know he hasn't, of drawing a line and closing a chapter for those who suffer still? That is something unreachable, and we need to show utmost sensitivity on those points. Mr. Speaker, the work of Operation Canova has commanded cross-community support. Where does that model and approach fit in my right honourable friend's thinking as he tries to pursue truth and reconciliation? How will he evolve these plans working in concert with the Irish government in order to ensure and maximise buy-in for a joint approach? And is there a George Mitchell-like figure hovering in the wings who could be deployed to help to act as an honest broker as we try to resolve this all too long issue?
Sheriff State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments of the Chairman of the Select Committee. There is a lot of work to do with our partners, not just victims and veterans, who are also, of course, often get scared of victims of the troubles themselves in a wide sense as well, and directly in some cases, and the parties in Northern Ireland, but also the Irish Government. There are still a range of cases that I know exist that the First Minister of Northern Ireland not that long ago wrote to the Taoiseach about, and that's why we want to make sure we are looking at how we can work together to ensure that as we look at information recovery, we find a way to do this that gets to the truth, gets to information that we have not yet been able to secure in a process that works for families and victims. I do think Operation Canova is a very, very good example of how you can show that you can get to the truth, you can get information in a format that hasn't been had before. We need to accept the difficult reality of over the last 5 years. It's not yet seen any successful prosecutions, but the model of how they have worked and worked with victims and with families, I think, is an important part of the discussions to have around information recovery. And I share with him the view that this is never about ignoring what has happened. We shouldn't do that. It would be wrong to do that. We have to be conscious of our past in order to be able to understand and learn more about where we can go for our future. And that has to be the aim for people and the young generation of people in Northern Ireland in the future.
We now come to Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know this is a difficult issue, and the Secretary of State is not the first to attempt to address these matters. And I think we all have to take responsibility for the failure since 1998 to deal effectively with this matter. Today, Mr. Speaker, on the 14th of July in 1984, two of my comrades in the Ulster Defence Regiment, Private Norman McKinley and Corporal Heather Kerrigan, were murdered by the IRA near Castlederg in a landmine explosion. I think also today, even of members of this House who lost their lives during the Troubles, people like Erin Neve, murdered in the precincts of this House, and for whom no one has been brought to justice. I think of the Reverend Robert Bradford, the member for South Belfast, murdered in his advice centre, for whom no one has been brought to justice. Like the former Prime Minister, I want to take the path to reconciliation, but I cannot believe that the path to reconciliation is made easier when we sacrifice justice. And I think that the victims have to be at the centre of this. And I would urge the Secretary of State, in taking forward his proposals, to listen to their voices. This must be a victim-centred process. It cannot be at their expense. I want Northern Ireland to move forward. I want that young generation to see a Northern Ireland that looks to the future and not living in the past. But the rule of law is important, and upholding the rule of law after all that we've been through in Northern Ireland is important. Justice is important. Yes, truth is important as well. But I think the Secretary of State, Mr. Speaker, needs now to reassure the victims that they will be part of the discussion of these proposals, that their quest for justice will not be ignored.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. Victims must be a huge, an important part of this process. As I say, I know we were engaged with organisations such as WAVE, and I met with the South East Fermanagh Foundation myself just last week, and their stories and those of others that I've met and talked to are moving, and in cases, as he will know, and many in this House will know, harrowing. And he's right to talk about members of this House and members of my party who obviously have been victims. I noticed the comments this morning, I think powerful comments from Lord Tebbit as well around his views of this. And it's right that we have victims in our mind. And as I say, we often forget that many of those who served, as he rightly outlines, are also victims and close to victims as well. And that's why taking this thoughtful approach, as he outlines, I think is absolutely right. I think it's why it's right that there is a point at which we need to be honest with people and deal with that very painful reality of where we are and what is achievable for people, and acknowledging the reality of where we are with retributive justice following the Sentencing Act that followed the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and actually looking at restorative justice and reconciliation as a way forward, and how do we facilitate getting to the information, to get to accountability, to get to truth, and to get to reconciliation. We think this is a way forward. We think this is after so many years of looking at this is the right way forward, but I look forward to having that discussion and debate with him and with others.
Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many families who've lost loved ones during the Troubles, the chances of achieving a criminal justice outcome is vanishingly small, and that is leading, understandably, to pain, to suffering and to disappointment. And even despite that, for many, then the proposal to apply a statute of limitations is going to be extremely difficult to accept. So will my right honourable friend assure me that he's working with communities on all sides to ensure that everybody's voice is heard?
So State.
Yes, I can absolutely give that assurance. We have been over the last 18 months, both with wider civic society as well. We were certainly in the intensive talks that began after the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference on the 24th of June and therefore started effectively last week. The week before last will continue for the next few weeks. We will certainly be doing that.
We come to the columnist with the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In October 1990, Patsy Gillespie was abducted from his home by the IRA. His family were told he would be back soon, whilst being held at gunpoint. Patsy was then chained to the driver's seat of a van filled with explosives and forced at gunpoint to drive that van to a nearby army base. The IRA then remotely detonated that bomb, killing Patsy and 5 soldiers. Will the Secretary of State come with me and explain to his widow, Kathleen, why he wants to protect his killers from prosecution and even investigation?
Secretary of State.
Well, look, I appreciate the honourable gentleman tends to, in this House, as we saw yesterday, use emotive comments for sound bites, often for his own social media outlet. What I would say to you is to use somebody's harrowing experience and loss in that way, I think says much about him. I would happily meet with any victim to talk to them about the experience they've been through and why we need to be honest with them about what is achievable and how we help Northern Ireland move forward in a positive way, rather than continuing to use harrowing experiences like that for political end in the way that he has done in the last 24 hours.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome your opening statement, particularly about the way that this information came out today? Can I also say to the House that many years ago I was called to serve in Northern Ireland. I didn't ask to go, and it was a terrible thought that I had to carry a rifle in amongst members and citizens of the United Kingdom. I, like many others, lost a friend. Robert Nairac was taken prisoner, captured, tortured, murdered, and his body has never been found. And his parents died never knowing where he was or what happened to him. And the Good Friday Agreement, with its associations and also the letters of comfort that followed, have meant pretty much that many of us have accepted now, sadly, that we will never really know the truth about what happened to that brave man. And so I simply say today that this process, which is 4 years in the making, and I do upbraid the Secretary of State for not having brought forward legislation, at least give us an idea of what they are planning. But I do say to my right honourable friend that this will not be beloved of anybody. But I recognise sincerely, that if we are to move forward, we will all have to make some kind of sacrifice. My only concern is that the vexatious pursuit of soldiers who served like many of us did, because that's what their country called them to do, should end, and they themselves be seen as victims.
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend makes a powerful point, and obviously he'll appreciate, I know about obviously the Robert Nairac case is a very good example of where we've not been able to get to information, and actually why it is important to try and work with our partners, both with the Irish government and potentially in the United States as well, around how we can actually find a way forward that delivers information in a way we've just not been able to do so far. And what is it that allows us to step forward and do that? And as I say, I think these proposals give us the basis for doing that. I also think he makes a very powerful point, and I absolutely accept his point about legislation. Both himself, my honourable friend, the member for Rayleigh, the member for North Dun, and others around this House have for a very, very long time made the case for needing to move this issue forward. And I absolutely accept that they want to see that done and see that delivered as quickly as possible. And he makes a very important point, which I made, I alluded to earlier on in my comments, and I think it is worth making again, and I support his very, very strong, powerful point. Those who serve their country with honour, to protect life, to protect their country, are victims as well, and have just as an important voice in this as anybody else in looking at how we move things forward for the people of Northern Ireland.
Let's go to Stephen Farry. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These shameful proposals are an insult to all victims and indeed to many veterans who served honourably. They don't draw a line, but rather they cross the line on justice and the rule of law. It is staggering that the government is contemplating an amnesty, including for IRA and loyalist terrorists, in order to address this false narrative of vexatious investigations into veterans. There is near universal disapproval of these proposals in Northern Ireland. So can the Secretary of State give an assurance that he will not seek to impose these one-sided proposals over the heads of local political parties in Northern Ireland and indeed victims groups across the spectrum?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, I would just say to the gentleman, as I said earlier on, there is a very important, and I appreciate for some it can be now, but there is an important difference in why this is a statute of limitations. We are not pardoning terrorists for the heinous crimes that they committed. We are very clear as a government, we will never accept any moral equivalence between those who upheld the law and served their country and the citizens of Northern Ireland and those on all sides who sought to destroy it. I absolutely do want to find a way to work through this with people in Northern Ireland, parties, civic society and representatives of the victims groups and victims themselves to find a way forward. And I would say to him to look carefully at what we are talking about and engage positively around how we are looking to deal with information recovery in a way that means we can get to the truth, and with truth comes accountability in a way that in the last 23 years has failed everybody. There has to be a better way of doing this. I think there's a duty on all of us to find it.
Okay, we go by video link to Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having served on 3 operational tours, I have some knowledge of the province and more about the ongoing witch hunt of our veterans. Of course, I welcome any move to try and end this injustice. But I'm afraid I don't believe that former terrorists on both sides of the Sectarian divide will now participate in a truth recovery process if indeed I've understood my right honourable friend correctly. This is not South Africa. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's time for the long-awaited and frequently discussed and promised bill, not further discussions?
Secretary of State.
Well, I do recognise, as I said to my honourable friend, the member for Woodford Green, I do recognise the desire from colleagues to see legislation, and they will see legislation before the end of the autumn. I would have liked to bring legislation forward earlier, but I think it is important. We are working with our partners, not just in the Irish government, as I've outlined earlier on, but parties, interested parties and political parties in Northern Ireland to find a way forward if we can. This paper is intended to inform those discussions in the next few weeks and over the next few weeks so that we can find a mutual way forward. I have to say, one of the challenges with the situation we have at the moment, and I do recognise his point around who will and will not come forward with information, is at the moment that information is not coming forward. So if we don't find a way of doing something different, we are sadly in a position where, because of time, that information will no longer be with us. So it is time, we believe, to do something bold and different to find a way forward that can get to the truth as far as we can, to get answers for families who have waited for far too long, as well as helping Northern Ireland move forward.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State's statement today is a quite remarkable achievement. I've followed Northern Ireland politics all my adult life, and I think I can think of very few occasions where Secretaries of State in this place have been able to unite all 5 parties in Northern Ireland. But the Secretary of State today has achieved exactly that. They are, however, all united in telling him that on the question of an amnesty, he is wrong. He stands at the dispatch box today and says that he makes no moral equivalence between those who broke the law and those who uphold it. Why then is he offering them all legal equivalence?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm sure people would have asked our predecessors those sort of questions with the equivalence that came from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement under the Labour government back at the time of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the Sentencing Act that followed that. That is the reality of where we are. My difficult, why I refer to this, there is a difficult, painful reality of where we are, the situation we are in, the reality of not seeing prosecutions, and painfully being honest with victims about what is achievable. And in actually the conversation I know Operation Canova has had and I've had, when people talk about, as we've seen in the last 24 hours as well, wanting to get to the truth, get to information, get an understanding, in many cases, of what actually happened, the current system isn't working, and we need to find a different way forward to do something that can make a difference to get to the truth. And that's what we want to achieve with a proper, genuine, delivering information recovery process.
We go by video link to Mark Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can the Secretary of State confirm that today is but one part of a process that seeks to get buy-in from both parties and people across the political spectrum in Northern Ireland and engender hope for both current and future generations?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I can say to my honourable friend, absolutely. And I don't underestimate, and I do appreciate, as I said in my opening remarks, this is a very, very difficult, sensitive and complex situation. And I appreciate we are asking people to take a very, very big step. That's why we want to engage intensively over the weeks ahead, but we are being very honest with people. We need to do something different. The status quo has failed, and we need to find a different way forward. And I hope we'll be able to do that in the weeks ahead before we legislate in the autumn.
We go by video link to Tony Lloyd.
And thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State, can he honestly think of any circumstance when he would say to the families of victims of murder anywhere else in the United Kingdom, and including Northern Ireland, under different circumstances, that an amnesty is the way that would bring them reconciliation and peace? Because if not, how does he say to the families of victims of the Troubles that this is the correct way forward? And far from practically meaning that we move towards reconciliation, he's set up another wave, if he carries on with this, of intercommunal unhappiness, and that cannot be the way forward.
Secretary of State.
Well, I do agree with the Honourable Gentleman, is the desire to end, the intergenerational challenge and trauma that we are seeing with families now and people now who are with us who were simply not alive at the time of the Troubles and have no recollection of just how dreadful a situation that was for Northern Ireland. We need to stop this intergenerational issue. And I was saying in direct answer to his question that the Troubles does represent a uniquely troubled time in our history. The Good Friday Belfast Agreement itself acknowledged that in focusing on a shared future for Northern Ireland. We sometimes do need to make difficult decisions in relation to the past, as his colleagues did and as our colleagues did back at the time of the Belfast Agreement. We are in a different situation in Northern Ireland with the Troubles to most other crimes because of the Sentencing Act that followed the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We need to be honest about that and deal with the reality of where we are, however difficult that may be.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've had the privilege of working closely alongside the Secretary of State on legacy for much of the past 6 months, and I do believe he is onto something. This is difficult work and it involves compromise, so I am slightly baffled both today and previously by some of the negativity that I've encountered with regards to the statute. because I think we in Westminster have a responsibility to get behind him. So does my right honourable friend agree that his emerging statute will not just unpick and end this unpalatable cycle of vexatious behaviour, but will also help to create a strategic environment in Northern Ireland whereby truth, reconciliation and alternative forms of dispute resolution can flourish for the benefit of future peace and stability?
Secretary of State.
Well, I want to thank the honourable gentleman for his comments and experience that he has shared with our department over the last period, with his huge experience of serving in the armed forces and in Northern Ireland, the reality on the ground. And look, he's absolutely right. The focus has to be, and our intention is absolutely as he outlined, to find a way ultimately to ensure that people in Northern Ireland, families can get to the truth, those families who want it, and as a wider society in Northern Ireland, we can share and understand what happened and find a way to look forward to the future in a positive way.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House to make a statement? Just put it on record, the DUP do not support an amnesty for terrorist killers at all. Can the Secretary of State understand why legacy issues leave a bitter taste in the mouths of so many in the province who have seen hundreds of millions spent on inquiry after inquiry to ostensibly further the Republican agenda, to rewrite history, to make their abhorrent atrocities seem acceptable? There can be no equivalence whatsoever between the soldier and the police officer who served their country and those cowardly terrorists who hid behind masks and terrorised under the cover of darkness. We find, honestly, any such attempted equivalence as offensive, deeply offensive to us.
Secretary of State.
Look, I absolutely understand the point the honourable gentleman is making with clarity and passion, as I know he has done before. But obviously, as I said, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the Sentencing Act that followed that created legally an equivalence in the sense of how you deal legally with the troubles of the past, certainly in terms of sentencing, and that's the reality we are dealing with. And this is why I make the point that there is absolutely no question that we would ever accept a moral equivalence between those who served their country, protected life, and put themselves at risk, obviously, clearly for many suffering injury and loss of life as well, and hence why I agree with my honourable friend's comment earlier on about many of those who served our victims as well. There is no moral equivalence between that and those terrorists who put Northern Ireland through a period of dark, as the Honourable Lady rightly outlined, a dark and dreadful period of the troubles that are preventing Northern Ireland from moving forward in an economic way that we are still seeing the fallout from today. And that is why, some 23 years on from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, I think we do need to be honest about the difficult reality of that, what that means, and what we need to do to take that big step to look at how we move forward and free society and the young of today and tomorrow to move forward in a positive way, but never forgetting the past of what happened.
Mark Francois.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I say to the Secretary of State, more in sorrow than in anger, after 4 years of promising to do something about this, after 2 general election manifestos, after endless promises at the dispatch box, not just from him, but from the Prime Minister himself, and after he privately assured the Veterans Support Group many weeks ago that we would see the second reading of a bill by the summer recess, what do we have today? We have a consultation document. And then he's promised to introduce legislation by the end of the autumn. That means first reading by Christmas. This will undoubtedly be a controversial bill, so that means we'll be lucky to get it onto the statute book by next summer. So our veterans, many of them in the autumn of their lives, many of them in ill health, will still have to undergo the sword of Damocles for at least another year. I say to our procrastinating Secretary of State, you are the boy who cried wolf once too often. Here's my question. After 4 years of this, where's your bill, Brandon?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I think my honourable friend has just outlined and highlighted the seriousness with which we are taking our engagement. And I think the very fact that he's quite right. I did want to, and as I said earlier on this afternoon in this statement, I would have liked to have brought legislation before this House before the summer recess. I had committed to update this House on where we were back in January, February before the summer recess, which is what we were doing. But I would have liked to have brought forward a second reading of a bill before the summer recess. But, as I say, the reality is the Irish Government had agreed to come into talks with us. We agreed that formally on the 24th of June. I think that's a very important and positive step. I do think it's important that we work together on that with the parties in Northern Ireland and wider civic society, the victims groups and veterans groups as well. And the fact that we have put off taking legislation forward at this point in time, I think highlights our credentials for the fact that we do want to engage on this and find a way forward for people and with people in Northern Ireland. I absolutely accept his point around how long this has taken and the determination. I know the dogged determination he has shown over a very, very long period of time to deliver for veterans in Northern Ireland, as well as more widely. I am determined that we will end the cycle of investigations for veterans, which has gone on for far too long. He is right about that. And the proof of me, and I've heard his quote a couple of times now, I'll have to take that on the chin until I can prove him otherwise in fact by bringing forward legislation that can ensure that we end this cycle of investigations that is unfairly treating our veterans, that is serving nobody, and ensuring we have a system at the moment in Northern Ireland that is not getting to the truth, that is not getting to information, and therefore is not allowing that society to move forward and reconcile in the future. All of that has to come together as a package. We're determined to do that in partnership with people and to do that at speed.
We go by video link to Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it the case that vexatious complaints are only half the story? That the outcome of inquests, the outcome of the Canova investigation, if they propose that there should be trials, that they are now, as of today, redundant? And can the Secretary of State confirm if cases against people like Rita O'Hare, cases against John Downey, cases against Owen Karen, are those cases because they are already live? Do they cease to exist and do those people get off scot-free? Can I confirm to the House what is the true outcome of today's proposals?
Secretary of State.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has just highlighted some of the challenges with how you deal with these issues and move forward in this difficult reality that I outlined. I would just say to him, as we're working through in the weeks ahead, some of the details around this are the details we need to work through, including talking to, as I say, victims groups and political parties, people such as himself, to make sure we take this on board so that when we do legislate, we're able to do so in a way that isn't just able to help Northern Ireland move forward, but make sure that it deals with everything in a genuinely holistic way, so that if we say we're going to end this cycle of investigations that is serving nobody and is acting unfairly, that we actually are able to ensure we do so properly.
Tanmanjeet Singh Dassi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Margaret Valente was just 30 years old in 1980 when her husband was abducted by the Provisional IRA, held captive for 3 days before being murdered. 10 years later, her son-in-law was brutally murdered by the UVF, and to this day, she has no idea whether there was a thorough investigation into either murder. So how can the Secretary of State stand there and say that the answer to this staggering failure of justice for Margaret and hundreds like her is to completely close the book altogether and to cruelly deny her any chance of finding the truth about what happened to her loved ones? And would Conservative ministers be so insensitive about coming up with such ludicrous legislation if a member of their own family was such a victim?
Secretary of State.
Well, I would just say to the Honourable Gentleman that he's just highlighted the fact that he hasn't really paid any attention to what we've been talking about and what has been, and he clearly is not up to speed with what we've been talking about with parties and victims groups and veterans around what these proposals are. I would suggest he has a look at the command paper, because quite the opposite is true. The very fact that those victims have not been able to get to the truth is the issue we need to deal with, and it's why the information recovery part of this is so important in going forward. I'd suggest he looks carefully at the command paper, looks again at what I said in my opening statement, before standing up and making a comment that is so far from the truth that it almost doesn't really bear answering.
And finally, Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend accept that these proposals are practically identical to those put forward by the Defence Committee in its report of April 2017? Does he also accept that the time will never come when there will be agreement by all parties, and that it is up to government to decide what it's going to do and do it, does he accept that the vexatious pursuit of soldiers cannot be stopped without a statute of limitations, and a statute of limitations to conform with international law cannot be selective? And finally, does he accept that a truth recovery mechanism fulfills the requirement of international law to have a proper inquiry, and that is the only way that people are going to be likely to reveal what happened when they no longer have to fear prosecution that would in any case almost certainly fail?
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend is hugely expertise and experience in these matters. He's quite right. The Select Committee report is very clear and goes into great detail in terms of how this can work. And he's also absolutely right, as none of us will be surprised, in terms of his understanding, his outline of why it is so important that the information recovery, the truth and the reconciliation part of this is so important. Because that is not only how we move Northern Ireland forward, but actually coming back to my opening remarks in my statement earlier this afternoon, it's how we ensure that what we do is compliant with human rights, is Article 2 compliant, and to do that we need to make sure that information recovery is very clear, very focused and able to deliver. And there are examples that we've seen through Operation Canova and others where that can be done. And I want to thank the Honourable Gentleman for the expertise and the advice that he's been able to give from that report and since, but he is absolutely right.
Thank you. I will now suspend the House for 3 minutes in order that arrangements can be made for the next item of business. Order. Order. I call Secretary of State Grant Shapps to make a statement.
Madam Deputy Speaker, transport decarbonisation is a dull way of describing something much more exciting and far-reaching. Because transport is not just about how you get around, it's something much more fundamental. It shapes our towns and our cities and our countryside. Today we're publishing our transport decarbonisation plan, the first in the world, a comprehensive yet urgent strategy to end transport's contribution to climate change within the next 3 decades, showing global leadership as we prepare to host COP26 in November. It's not about stopping people doing things, it's about doing the same things differently. We still want to fly on holiday, but it will be in more efficient aircraft. We will be using sustainable fuel. We still drive our cars on improved roads, but increasing in zero emission. And we'll still have new development and additional housing, for example, but it won't force us into high carbon lifestyles by planning them more carefully. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know the world is running out of time to tackle climate change. Unless we take decisive and radical action now, it will be soon to be too late to prevent catastrophic damage to our planet. And that will also threaten our security and our prosperity. But at the same time, terms such as decarbonisation and net zero seem abstract to many people. This plan argues that transport is not just how you get around, it influences our living standards, in fact, our whole quality of life. It can shape all these things, for good or for bad. Bad is traffic congestion and pollution, which also contributes to climate change. Indeed, transport's now the single biggest contributor to UK greenhouse gas emissions. And carbonisation is not just some technocratic process, it's how we fix some of that harm. It's how we make sure that transport shapes the country and the economy in ways that are good. It's about taking filth out of the air and creating better places. It's about a second industrial revolution, creating hundreds of thousands of green jobs in places that were the cradle of the first one. And driving all this will be the consumer, making greener travel choices informed by better data, and government working with industry to meet our carbon budgets and to keep this green transport revolution on track. And what's exciting about the plan is that for the first time we have the opportunity to decarbonise transport without curtailing our freedoms. It won't stop us from driving, commuting to work or going on holiday, but we'll be using zero-emission cars, motorcycles and trucks, we'll be travelling in zero-emission trains, ferries, buses and coaches, we'll be cycling and we'll be walking more and we'll be flying in more efficient aircraft using sustainable aviation fuels. Now, I accept that even a few years ago, this vision we're setting out today would have seemed overambitious. But such is the progress we're making in the country in terms of technology and engineering and building momentum for the net zero challenge ahead and in showing real political leadership for the biggest challenge in our lifetime that we can now commit to a bold strategy to help wean transport off fossil fuels and reach net zero in under 30 years. We've already announced that the sale of new cars and vans powered solely by petrol or by diesel will cease in 2030 and for all cars and vans to be fully zero emission at the tailpipe by 2035. A commitment that would not have been deliverable while we were members of the EU, and this is because our own type approval framework would have breached the single market had we tried. To underpin these phase-out dates, we've had today published our 2035 delivery plan, which sets out the investment and the measures from government to deliver mass ownership of zero-emission cars and vans. And we published a green paper, one of 10 different documents which sit alongside this transport decarbonisation plan, which shows our new road vehicle CO2 emissions regulatory framework and which will be ambitious in decarbonising road transport and tailored to UK needs. And this could include, for example, a zero-emission mandate for manufacturers, so they sell an ever-increasing proportion of zero-emission vehicles before they're able to sell any others. But the decarbonisation plan goes further still, with a commitment to consult on a world-leading pledge to phase out sale of all new non-zero emission road vehicles and motorcycles from motorcycles to HGVs. And we believe this should be done from 2040 at the latest, and that's a massive step forward towards cleaning up our road transport altogether. And by doing so, we'll remove the source of over 90% of our total domestic transport emissions. But we'll go further, creating a net zero rail network by 2050, replacing all of our diesel-only trains by 2040 with super clean technologies like hydrogen. Hundreds of electric buses are already operating in many UK cities, but soon that will be thousands. And this will not just benefit urban areas, but the whole country, remote and rural areas that have not always been best served by such changes in the past. They'll see the benefits as well this time. Completely clean buses will form the backbone of our local public transport system. And we'll continue to work with industry to roll out a national electric vehicle charging network, as I announced from this dispatch box, nearly 25,000 public charging devices already installed, including more chargers per 100 miles of major key strategic road network than any other country in Europe. And that will include smart vehicle charging to reduce energy bills and when demand for electricity in the system is at its lowest. And something that will also benefit the government would be the government's own fleet of some 40,000 different vehicles, which we aim to have fully electric by 2027. We'll consult on phasing out sales of new, non-zero emission capable domestic ships too. And of course, we'll be a hub for green air travel. Today we've launched a consultation which sets out how we'll deliver net zero aviation by 2050, working with the Jet Zero Council, with a target to achieve zero-emission transatlantic flight within our generation. And if that seems like science fiction, Madam Deputy Speaker, then it's interesting to know that we have already flown the world's first zero-carbon hydrogen aircraft from Cranfield Airport in Bedfordshire. Took a 20-minute flight, another world first for Britain. We'll support and incentivise green development by aligning billions of pounds of infrastructure investment with our net zero programme. Like the billions we're investing to build a thriving electric supply chain, to secure gigafactories here in the UK to create more efficient aviation engines, lighter planes, sustainable fuels, and develop clean freight transport. So just as green transport won't stop us travelling, it certainly won't hold back industry either. In fact, it will open up unparalleled opportunities for new jobs and for enterprise. Just in recent weeks alone, we've seen both Nissan and Vauxhall committed to massive investments in electric vehicle and battery production in Sunderland and in Ellesmere Port. They're the modern-day equivalents of early investments in our railway 200 years ago, or indeed in our fledgling motor industry a century later. What we're seeing here is the start of a second greener industrial revolution, which, just like the first, will be driven by transport. But this time, delivering triple the benefits for our economy, for jobs, and for the future of our planet. But we cannot, of course, simply rely on technology, nor can we believe that zero-emission vehicles will solve all of our problems. They won't, especially in meeting our medium-term targets for 2030s. The pandemic has provided a chance to rethink how we travel. How do we do public transport? In fact, we've already seen a 46% increase in the number of road miles being cycled last year, the biggest increase since the Second World War. And cycling rose by more in a single year than the previous 20 years put together. And with £2 billion of new funding, more than 300 cycling and walking schemes are being delivered, and many more are on their way. We pledged also £3 billion to revolutionise local buses in England outside London, with London-style, cheap, flat fares and integrated ticketing. And, of course, we're creating Great British Railways to bring the railway network back together and make it easier for people to travel by train. We want to make public transport, cycling and walking the natural first choice for who can. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, 2050 may seem like a long way into the future, but it is just 29 years. And that's why the pace of change will be unparalleled, and why this new decarbonisation plan is a landmark in the evolution of the way that we do transport in this country. We're the first country in the world to do this, taking a firm leadership position as we host COP26 later this year in Glasgow.
and from being part of the climate change problem to a major part of the solution. That's the transformation we must deliver by 2050, and that's the transformation we will achieve with this transport decarbonisation plan. I'm placing a copy of the plan in the library of the House, and I commend the statement to the House.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I thank the Secretary of State for advanced sight of his statement. We haven't yet had the joy of reading the plan, although I look forward to seeing it later in the library when I get pointed towards the fiction section, as with most of the strategies produced by the government more recently. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I hope we are coming through the COVID-19 pandemic, we cannot forget that we're still in this climate emergency, nor can we miss the opportunity to kickstart a new green economy built on decent, well-paid and skilled jobs. With transport now the largest contributor to UK emissions, this should have been the chance for ministers to really set out that ambitious plan, which would really lead the way ahead of COP26. Not one words or re-announcements, but a real plan supporting aviation and maritime, rail and freight, local public transport, alongside active travel. This climate emergency requires urgent action, actually many years ago, yet after a decade in government, I'm afraid they've been found wanting. In the time the government has been in office, the number of petrol and diesel vans has rocketed by 1 million. That's more polluting vans on our roads. And much of that can be attributed to last-mile courier delivery vehicles. Yet the government have been silent on an approach to dealing with that. Under these plans, the government will treat the likes of Amazon, who were boomed during the pandemic, no differently than the self-employed builder, who will take the van at the start of the job, often leaving it parked outside the house until the job is finished. No differentiation at all between those different uses. And today, the average age of a van on the road is the oldest since records began. Nearly 1 million vehicles on the roads are now more than 13 years old. Yet there is no van scrappage scheme, let alone one for cars. All we have on offer is that the government have committed to do what in fact they should be doing already, which is to electrify the entire fleet of government cars and vans by 2027. But how can we trust the government to deliver on this promise when its own transport department has only managed to fully electrify just 2% of its own fleet? And there's nothing to support back in Britain in the future for the economy by making and buying more vehicles here in Britain, as championed by the Shadow Chancellor. Madam Deputy Speaker, he notes that smart electric vehicle charging points are important, but he'll also know there is a woeful lack of them across the country. The government must be ambitious, but it must also genuinely make sure that the investment reaches all parts of the country. So Westminster sees 390 charging points per 100,000 population, 390, compared to just 5.1 for people in Wigan. Numbers on the whole are more charging points. What we find is that there are more charging points in London than the whole of the north of England and the whole of the Midlands combined. So we are not seeing the investment being levelled out in an equal way. So where is the plan to accelerate that and make sure that every part of the country gets its fair share? And although he mentions the zero emission vehicle mandate, it's only nodded to. There's no strong commitment. There's no firm plan in place for achieving that. And aside from the environmental emergency, there is also a clear health emergency. 40,000 people a year die from air-polluted related illnesses. And so we must be leaders in modal shift away from private cars and ambitious on investment in active travel. Yet the government has overseen a reduction of thousands of bus routes. At the same time, ticket prices have rocketed on buses and on trains. The government hasn't even delivered a single one of the 4,000 green buses they've repeatedly promised. And even if they were to deliver on this promise, it's a drop in the ocean and doesn't address the remaining 28,000 buses that won't be replaced under that scheme. And beyond the bus, the Secretary of State talks about long-promised money for cycling, but when's that money going to be spent? or will be here next year hearing the same re-announcement. Unless would-be cyclists feel safe, they will not make that shift. The government's own survey reported that 66% of those who responded said that the roads were too dangerous for them to consider cycling on. And moving on to aviation, he wants to get to net zero international aviation emissions by 2050 and 2040 for domestic flights. Why then, Madam Deputy Speaker, is this department planning to cut air passenger duty on those same flights rather than having a targeted sectoral deal that had very firm commitments to decarbonisation built in? As usual, we get more Jet Zero Council consultations, more meetings will come through the pipeline, but where's the action? And the list goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, including the failure to deliver on a genuinely flexible season ticket to get commuters back on our trains. Instead, what we do see is a £1 billion cut from Network Rail's infrastructure budget. And at the same time, fares for passengers are increasing all the time. Now, we were promised an ambitious plan to lead the world ahead of COP26. Madam Deputy Speaker, if that was the test, then I'm afraid the government has failed.
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid we've been here before a couple of times of late, and I understand the difficulty. For the honourable gentleman. He freely acknowledges he's not actually seen or read this document, and yet he has a stream of criticism for what's inside it, which I find it extraordinary. And rather than taking, I thought, what was quite a detailed statement, so that you could hear all the various different points, instead he read from the preordained script, which claimed that none of the things we're doing were really actually happening. And let's just remind the House, therefore, what actually happened, because I heard him clearly. He mentions that he doesn't think we've been moving fast enough. Let's just check the record. Whilst they were in power, they delivered 63 miles of electrified trains. In the last 3 years, we've done 700 miles under this government, just in 3 years. He points to a lack of charging, although I announced in my, actually at the dispatch box a couple of weeks ago and commented on my speech, there were 25,000 public chargers. I should also comment, there are a couple of 100,000 private chargers on top of that. And I am very sorry to hear that Wigan Labour Council has not got enough charging points. I will, on his behalf, this afternoon, ensure that I contact them to make sure they apply for the grants that are available, so we can sort that out for residents in Labour Wigan forthwith. He mentions about zero emissions vehicle mandates. I'm pleased it sounds like there's some agreement on that. The decarbonisation plan discusses it. We also launched a consultation today. I hope we'll agree that you can't simply spring upon the entire sector something as important as a zero mandate. You've got to consult with them first. That's being launched today. There's also another 9 either consultations, technical documents or outcomes from consultations being launched alongside this today. Again, I invite him to read it. I accept that he won't have done at this time, but I think he'll find a lot of his concerns and criticisms are covered. He mentions, for example, that, where are these 4,000 buses? I have some good news for him. It's not that just when one comes along, 3. Actually, not just 3, 900 buses. 900 of them are in production right now. 50 of them are already on the road, 900 of them in production, putting us easily on track to meet our 4,000 by the end of Parliament in production. So good news for him there. He mentions the Jet Zero Council. And he's absolutely right. I make no apology for government meeting with academia, with the sector. We've had our 3rd main Jet Zero Council meeting. There have been dozens of the sub-meetings of the technical working groups. And, what I hear, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the opposition doesn't understand. We've already in this country, thanks to our Jet Zero Council work, flown the world's first hydrogen aircraft. But it's not good enough for them. They still think that we're not doing anything. Good news for him, that aircraft is being upsized to a 19-20-seater aircraft, and that's going to be flown shortly, so he won't have to wait long for even more news on that front, along with the electrification of aircraft as well, with the likes of Rolls-Royce and others. I heard what he had to say about rail and usage and increasing usage, particularly coming out of the pandemic. It is a carbon-friendly way to travel. And I heard the criticism that his party laid against the flexible season ticket previously. His stats, Madam Speaker, I'm sure inadvertently, are completely dodgy. What they failed to do was take into account that anybody travelling 2 or 3 days a week would be at least 20% better off when they do that, by comparison to buying a regular ticket or indeed a season ticket. And I saw, and I invite members, I saw his YouTube video on the subject. I will write to him, explaining chapter and verse why he was misquoting stats and information, which I'm pleased he's reminded me of, because it will give me the opportunity to write back to him. And I will, for the purposes of clarity for the whole House, ensure I publish that letter to the House, so that the House is able to judge the stats for themselves. But lastly, Madam Speaker, because I know there are members who want to come in and speak, I've mentioned today, and we're very proud of the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, the 9 or 10 different documents which back this up, the incredible level of detail that's gone into this work. I ask, where is Labour's plan? Where are the detailed plans? Where is the level of technical analysis? Because all I ever hear is, not having read our plan, they don't have their own, and yet they're still up for criticising ours.
Thank you. We go now by video link. Go now by video link to Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was told the Minister had sent the draft final plan back for not being ambitious enough, I actually harboured hopes that this might well be a serious plan to match the seriousness of our times. It will certainly require investment of a scale that the Chancellor won't naturally be disposed to. But sadly, from zero-emission cars and buses to rail, maritime, active travel and aviation, it's the lack of ambition, certainly relative to Scotland, that stands out. Scotland aims to cut car use by 20% by 2030, and we will spend 10% of the transport capital budget on active travel. But for the cars that remain, we have twice as many rapid charging points per head, with 60% of charging points free to use. That's 3 times higher than England's 20%. Meanwhile, this government has halved the plug-in car grant. Why won't he match Scotland's ambition on car use? And how does he think he will meet his EV targets with poor charging infrastructure and reducing incentives without a scrappage scheme, whilst a substantial price gap between petrol and diesel cars and zero-emission cars remains? On buses, the pledge on 4,000 new buses represents only a tenth of the English fleet. And even now, the Zebra scheme is finally in place. Progress is glacial. In contrast, Scotland plans to remove half of its diesel fleet by 2023 and has the equivalent of over 2,700 buses already on order. Will it confirm when 4,000 buses will actually be delivered under the current scheme and when the next scheme will begin? The Secretary of State aims to decarbonise rail in England by 2050. That's 15 years after Scotland aims to. Scotland has led the way in a programme of rolling electrification. The Transport Select Committee recommended a similar programme for England. So will it commit to such a programme matching Scotland's pace? And if so, when will the first schemes be announced? And on decarbonising the maritime sector, there is only lip service. But I will try and end on consensus with aviation, something which we agree is difficult, and in which hydrogen alongside SAFs will play a leading role. Again, Scotland leads the way with government investment in decarbonisation programmes, with plans for battery electric and hydrogen test flights, working with partners such as Zero Avia and Loganair as part of our ambition to make the Highlands and Islands the world's first zero-emission aviation region by 2040. We have a leading position in hydrogen aviation technology. We must increase investment to ensure we stay that way.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm always keen to work across the House wherever we agree on that last point on aviation and indeed on the number of car chargers in Scotland. This is all very good. What I can't understand is why the Honourable Gentleman is both talking about the success of a car charger rollout whilst being anti-car and actually saying that he doesn't want people to use the car, even electric vehicles, which are green. I don't understand how he can be proud of both points at the same time. But the main point that I'd make to the Honourable Gentleman, who, let's face it, comes here quite often, either remotely or in the chamber, and quite often sings the praises of the Scottish Government. So I thought I would check the facts for the clarity of the House. And time again, SNP government has actually missed their own statutory target for reducing emissions. Not 1 year, not 2 years, but now for the 3rd year in a row.
Elaine Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the strategy outlined by my right honourable friend. Can he reassure rural constituents like mine in North Devon, where there are fewer buses and longer journeys to even basic amenities, that they will not be left behind?
Well, yes, indeed. And in fact, the bus strategy, which announced £3 billion of money to do a number of different things, including to get to a London-style service for other parts of England, also has the rural bus strategy contained within it. Currently, we're going through work with trialling that in 17 different areas, and I know that her area will benefit from the outcome of that work, and that her work on championing the bus for her constituents is very welcome to them, and I know it will pay dividends.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Restoring Your Railway Fund and the £3 billion Bus Back Better strategy are both vitally important to levelling up in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torque, following decades of local bus and rail decline. So would my right honourable friend agree that reopening the Stoke to Leek line, providing access for all upgrades at Longport Railway Station, and ensuring Stoke-on-Trent secures a major piece of funding to improve our best services and roadside infrastructure, we can reduce emissions in our fantastic city?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, nobody, but maybe apart from the other two Stoke MPs, do so much to promote the interests of everybody in Stoke. And I know the Stoke Leek line is something he's been very passionate about. I know that he has a bid into the Restoring the Railways Ideas Fund. He'll know that that comes to conclusions this summer. I wish them every success in that competition and making active travel as well as those railway lines the first choice for everybody in the city.
Sarah Aldey.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I looked for a copy of the plan online this morning, and alas, I was unable to find it. I see it there now, tantalisingly out of reach. So I just don't know whether to take what I saw in a press release this morning about the government's commitment to achieve net zero aviation in this country by 2040, but I see no mention of that in the statement. However, my question was going to be if that is the government's commitment, and as I say, I don't know. It's not clear to me that developments in aviation are going to help us to reach a net zero aviation industry by 2040. I've been speaking to some businesses who are doing incredible work in this area around hydrogen aviation. I'm very excited about the possibilities, but it seems to me if we are aiming for 2040 net zero aviation, there needs to be a combination both of technological development, but also flight reduction, because otherwise it's not going to be possible. So on that basis, can he confirm that reducing flights will form part of this plan, if it is a plan to reduce net zero, to get this country to net zero emissions in aviation by 2040, and that he will therefore act decisively to stop expansion at Heathrow?
Thank you very much. These are good questions. I just want to point out that the written statement was put down to the House at 7 a.m. this morning. It does indeed confirm that the plan is for domestic aviation to reach net zero by 2040. She rightly asks a list of questions about whether that's possible. I should point out to the House that whereas, for example, roads accounts for 90% of CO2 emissions from transport, and transport itself perhaps 27 to 30% of total emissions, within that 27% of total emissions, the aviation section of that, whereas roads is 90%, is 1.2%. So this is a small sliver, but a very difficult bit to decarbonise. And to answer a question, I think the answer is emphatically yes, because I've been working with the Jet Zero Council over these recent months. We will, for example, have planes for VIPs returning from COP26 with the offer of SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, taking them home. And that is in 2021. We've got until 2040 to develop some of the other great plans, including hydrogen and battery technology. So yes, I'm confident we can get there, and it's very much included in the plan.
Dr. Luke Evans.
I welcome the Secretary of State's shiny new plan. I too hold a shiny new plan from the Midlands Engine, 10-point plan for green growth released this month. Point 2 is about the net zero transport, and I'm proud as a Midlands MP that the Midlands has an automotive industry that employs 293,000 people and 16 of the world's top 20 automotive suppliers. So will he meet with me and the Midlands Engine to discuss how Bosworth, Leicestershire and indeed the country can benefit from both our plans?
Oh, lovely.
Well, I just want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for the work he's been doing with the Midlands engine. I thank him for welcoming the plan as well. And I think it would be a great idea if he were to meet up with my honourable friend, the Minister for the Future of Transport, to discuss exactly that.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thought the Secretary of State must have been reading Labour's manifesto, where we set out a comprehensive sustainable transport plan. I want to ask the Secretary of State about the infrastructure his government are building, because we need good infrastructure to see that modal shift and not to see transport polluting our urban centres in particular. So can I ask him why LNER and Network Rail are building 1,297 new car parking spaces in the centre of York, and on the York Central site owned by Network Rail, they're putting 2,600 car parking spaces, which is going to suck congestion and pollution into the heart of my city, and will he meet to discuss it?
Well, I hesitate to mention, I don't want to embarrass the Honourable Lady, but you know, when she talks about us reading from their manifesto, I can assure her that's not the case. It was, of course, an utterly unachievable manifesto when it came to net zero, not my words, but the words of the GMB union from the time. We're not anti-car. I can't get this across enough. We're building roads, £27.4 billion in RIS2. We believe that not just cars, but buses and bicycles require roads to get around. We want them to be of good quality. We want to reduce the congestion and therefore reduce the environmental damage as well. So quite simply, we're not anti-car. But I know that York will have many different attributes. Next to that fabulous York Railway train museum, which I enjoy visiting so much. Who knows, one day they might have the home of Great British Railways.
Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend the Secretary of State on today's announcement? Would he agree with me that it is the work of business that is providing the solution to these problems? From the fabulous endeavour and effort that's going into the Jet Zero Council to Electric Avenue at that former fount of petrol heads that my honourable friend, the member for Redditch, visited last week to see the new array of electric vehicles that are coming. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, would you just also agree with me? It's such a great shame that the member for Brighton Pavilion is not here today to hear about the fabulous solutions to these problems.
Well, I want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work as the UK's net zero business champion in promoting all of these causes. He's absolutely right. I haven't been to Goodwin, but yesterday I went to Bedford to see a Formula E car, which is an electric racing car. The technology is moving from the cars in about 18 months, from car to, for example, the Nissan Leaf that I was stood next to. It really is a tremendous transfer of power, one to the other, of technology, one to the other. And I do think that all of his work in encouraging this along, working hard to push for the Jet Zero, the Net Zero, the Cars Zero, is doing a fantastic job in helping us on the road to zero. So I thank him.
John Speller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Secretary of State certainly in Duracell bunny mode today. And can I share the concern of the Shadow Transport Minister at the lack of focus in making transport vehicles in Britain? The Minister talked of new buses, but will the hydrogen-powered buses come from Scotland and the electric-powered ones, from Northern Ireland and the electric-powered ones from Scotland and Leeds? Or once again, will the British taxpayer be subsidising jobs in China and Europe? And that's quite apart from trains, cars, vans and trucks. The government is a massive customer, so will it use that buying power to boost British industry and support British workers?
Madam Deputy Speaker, this Duracell bunny says yes.
Daniel Kozinski.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, but it is, in this day and age, it's wholly unsustainable for Shrewsbury to be serviced by diesel trains. And at the last general election, I promised many young people that I would campaign for the electrification of the line between Shrewsbury and Wolverhampton. He will be pleased to know that all the MPs between Shrewsbury and Wolverhampton support this vital investment. We're getting great support from Midlands Connect, Mr. Paul Butters and others are being very, very helpful. The electrification of the line would not only massively reduce times between Shrewsbury and our regional capital of Birmingham, but also massively reduce carbon emissions. So would he join me and support our campaign to ensure that this vital link between Shrewsbury and Birmingham, between Wolverhampton, is finally electrified?
Well, I do congratulate my honourable friend on his doughty campaign on behalf of the electrification of Shrewsbury to Wolverhampton. I know that he's met with my honourable friend, the the train minister, the rail minister, on this subject, and I look forward to seeing further progress. I mentioned before we've done 700 miles of electrification in just 3 years, over 1,100 since we came to power, and I hope that it's coming to him soon.
We now go by video link to Jonathan Edwards.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Madam Deputy Speaker. As he outlined in his statement, electric vehicles will be key to decarbonisation. What steps is he taking to address concerns about the vulnerability of charging networks to attacks by hackers?
Well, that is an excellent question. I have been speaking to the energy infrastructure, not only to make sure that it's secure from hackers, but also that we're able to provide the provision as the number of people buying electric cars continue to increase. It's worth mentioning that 1 in 7 people who bought a car this year bought a car with a plug on the end of it, effectively. So electric vehicles are being used in ever greater numbers. The question of electricity security and all our infrastructure security is also wrapped up in the good work that happens throughout government, and I'll make sure that I press his point home as we have those further discussions as well.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also very warmly welcome the statement today, and I look forward to digging into the plan, the details of the plan a bit later. But can I pick up on the point around HGVs? Because they are incredibly polluting. I have many constituents who live alongside the M25 and the M3 where this is an issue. And I very warmly welcome the consultation process in terms of trying to decarbonise them and thus stop that pollution. Sustainability has to be sustainable, and so I see why there needs to be a consultation to make sure it works and we can do this properly. But as a result of the consultation, can my right honourable friend really try and push forward as quickly as possible, getting diesel HGVs off the roads, decarbonising them and making a huge difference to my constituents who, quite frankly, for whom this cannot come soon enough?
Madam Deputy Speaker, a small but important subclause to my announcement that we'll be consulting on 2040 to outlaw the sale of diesel HGVs is actually that by 2035, 5 years earlier, we will have already done that for lorries up to 26 tonnes. And if you look at a 26-tonner, it's actually a very considerable size lorry. So his prayers may well be answered much sooner than he fears.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Poor air quality caused by congestion causes health problems and costs lives. This is particularly a problem for my constituents in the village of Golgate, which has the A6 running down the middle of it. So will the Secretary of State look favourably on plans to reconfigure junction 33 of the M6 to create a bypass for the village? But regardless of that, there will still be buses running through the village. And I note that the Secretary of State did say that some buses were in production, but does he not admit that his target of 4,000 zero emissions buses is unambitious when it represents just about 1/10 of the English fleet?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be pleased to hear that the bus target, if anything, we're ahead of schedule on that, with 900 already sort of on their way in production. So I hope we can go even further. Our £3 billion bus strategy is by far and away the largest for generations when it comes to buses, and I look forward to it helping her constituents. I will, with reference to the A6 junction 33, certainly mention this conversation to the Roads Minister and ask her to come back to the Honourable Lady.
We now go by video link to Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. Decarbonising our roads will be greatly assisted if we transfer more freight to rail. What progress is being made on delivering an east-west rail freight corridor from the Humber ports across to Liverpool and the West Coast ports? As well as being a boost to the economy of my constituency, this would result in a massive reduction in HGV movements on the M62, resulting in less congestion and the accompanying pollution.
Well, I'm very excited about the possibilities of opportunities, really, of taking traffic from ports and then putting it onto rail. It's known as intermodal because it requires delivery gauge capacity enhancements in order to achieve it, to make that flow. This is something that we're spending a lot of time on to get containers and biomass and the like to operate on the Transpennine routes between principally the western east coast ports of Liverpool, Ingham, Hull and Tees inland terminals. So we are working very hard on exactly his suggestion. We recognise it can take a lot of traffic off the roads.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Key to the successful decarbonisation of transportation will of course be the availability of sustainable fuels. Now in that regard, in Aberdeen, the Scottish Government and the local authority have put their money where their mouth is and backed Scotland's first commercial, at-scale hydrogen production and distribution facility. Sadly, the UK Government hasn't committed a single penny towards the Aberdeen Hydrogen Hub. So in that regard, and in good faith, can I ask the Secretary of State whether he will review that decision with a view, of course, to opening the chequebook and backing Aberdeen's renewable future?
Well, I'm very pleased to say that we have, in many senses, backed this because we, of course, are making sure that the consequentials from all of our decisions, including those decisions on decarbonisation of transport, are made in such a way that the government in Scotland is able to benefit from them. As I mentioned earlier, I think that it's very good to work closely together on these things. And so perhaps in that spirit, I can ask the Honourable Gentleman to press the Scottish Government on ensuring it reaches its statutory requirements to deliver carbon cuts over the next few years as well.
Teresa Villiers.
Will the Secretary of State agree with me that to tackle climate change, we need to decarbonise cars, vans and taxis, not demonise cars, vans and taxis? And with that in mind, will he talk to the Mayor of London about dismantling some of those schemes which have unjustifiably removed access to these vehicles to so many of the streets of central London?
My right honourable friend's absolutely right about our stance. We've heard it here in the debate this afternoon already, the discussion, that we are not against the car. We want people to have access to cars. And indeed, in rural areas, it's often the only way that people are able to get around, despite obviously wanting to improve bus services and the rest of it. And so we intend to carry on investment, but to make sure that the cars can run without damaging people's health and the environment, and that makes sense. And I'm afraid too often the Mayor in London gets the wrong end of the stick on all of this, seems to spend his time working out new ways to introduce boundary taxes and the like to try to charge constituents who aren't his at the cost of running his administration in London, and it's not on.
We now go by video link to Barry Sherman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State probably won't know that I'm very much involved in optimised waste logistics and the Clean Air Commission. But does he know that my consultation with industry, since this report has been leaked or it came out, and people have got a good idea what's in it, they think it's not ambitious enough. They want to move much faster. There is the technology, especially in heavy goods vehicles, at 4%. HGVs are 4% of the wheels on the road, but they're 25% of the pollution. So the industry is saying, Minister, we can do it faster. Hydrogen technology is far more advanced than he's been saying today. Give them the nod, give them the incentives. They can deliver on much better targets than 2030 and 2040.
Well, I welcome the Honourable Gentleman's enthusiasm for this agenda and also his work on logistics and clean air as well. Look, this is already the world's most ambitious plan, as far as I'm aware, to decarbonise the transport economy. He'll be pleased to hear that I'll be saying more about experimentation on things like hydrogen trucks, electrifying trucks, not just with internal batteries, but potentially with overhead wires as well. And I hope he'd agree with me that rather than just come here today and announce this and spring it on the HGV sector, it's absolutely right that we make clear that we have a plan and then consult on that plan. And that's why Logistics UK, by far and away the largest haulier logistics representative organisation in the UK, has said that this plan gives them confidence and clarity on the steps to the pathway to net zero.
Now we go by video link to Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today. Could he go further, however, on what we're going to do about ensuring that we have a sustainable maritime fleet and ensuring that, for example, around our coastal communities, there'll be the opportunity for plug-in processes for boats and ships, particularly that are fishing or around our coastal waters, and then in the long term, looking at alternative fuels that can power the long-distance fleets.
Stage.
This is very much at the forefront of our minds, and I thank my honourable friend for his comments and for welcoming this. We've already got plans in place to challenge stakeholders to agree a course to zero in maritime by 2050. The UK has a very rich, of course, maritime history with the International Maritime Organisation based in London, whilst it's a UN organisation, and we've been working closely with them on developing that shipping route to zero. We look forward to a lot more developments in this area, and I look forward to working with my honourable friend on them.
And now we go by video link to Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know the aviation industry has had a very difficult year, and the best way to build back better is to ensure investment is put into building planes that are greener, cleaner and quieter. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that for a future that benefits public health, his department must prioritise reducing noise pollution in major flight paths, which is a real concern for many of my constituents living under 2 flight paths? And will he meet with me to look at this?
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady that reducing noise pollution is critical. And there are several ways that we're doing that. We've just passed a piece of legislation which is designed to redesign airspace management. So it means that aircraft will be able to take off on a steeper climb, come down on a steeper descent, and that will help with reducing the noise footprint. But she's also right that as we decarbonise and as we have engines which aren't just necessarily fuelled by jet engines, which are of course notoriously noisy, these new technologies are leading to much quieter aircraft as well. So I look forward to working with her and her constituents on that, and I'm very happy to set up a meeting between her and the aviation minister, who's an expert in this area, to discuss it further.
And finally, we go by video link to Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome the range of measures being taken to decarbonise transport. However, in the highly rural areas of my constituency of Sleaford and North Hykeham, there are in some cases simply no practical alternatives to car use. While the cost of electric vehicles remain prohibitive for many, and there is as yet no infrastructure for charging points locally, many of my constituents are concerned that they may end up being financially penalised despite having no alternative. What assurances can my right honourable friend provide to my constituents that their needs and their finances are being fully taken into account as we work towards finding solutions to the decarbonisation of transport?
Reassuringly for my honourable friend, £1.8 billion is the answer. £582 million for plug-in vehicle grants towards her constituents' needs, and £1.3 billion for the rollout of that infrastructure for charging that I mentioned before. And often when we have this discussion, we seem to have it in abstract, because we don't acknowledge that there are couple 100,000 people who are charging their vehicles from home as well, as we get to the point where there are more charging locations than petrol stations. Our job is to make sure there are sufficient on-street parking and charging locations. And we've got some fantastic technology, including wireless technology, which we're trialling to ensure that cars can charge up even as they drive, but certainly as they're parked. I also want to point my honourable friend to the National Bus Strategy, which I think could assist in her area as well, where buses haven't run before. We'd like to get them running and regularly enough that people do have further alternatives again.
Thank you.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Point of order, Tangham Debonair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I seek your guidance from the Chair on a matter relating to another Member of Parliament, sadly, whom I have of course notified, and I did give Speaker prior notice of this point of order. I understand that following the end of a 6-week suspension ordered by the Independent Expert Panel for Harassment of Staff, a member has now returned to the estate, as is that member's right, of course, but taking a safeguarding approach. I am concerned that we have taken every possible step to prevent and manage any possible risk. As you may know, I have some expertise in this area, and unfortunately one of the best predictors of future risk is past behaviour. I'd therefore like to know, Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of colleagues and staff who have raised this with me, in the interest of safeguarding, what risk assessment has been done of the return of this member to the estate, whether experts have been consulted, if there is a risk management plan in place, and what guidance has been provided to staff to measure and to reassure them. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order and for having given me notice that she intended to raise this point of order, and I'm pleased that she has also confirmed that she has notified the member to whom she refers. Although it's not appropriate for me from the Chair to comment on individual cases on the floor of the House, I can confirm that the Honourable Member's suspension, as agreed by the House, has now come to an end. And in those circumstances, the Chair has no authority to prevent a member from attending the estate. The Honourable Lady has raised concerns about safety and security of other members and of people who work on the estate. And of course, the safety and security of everyone who works here is of paramount importance to Mr. Speaker, indeed to all of us. The House will be aware that the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme is in place and is designed to ensure that everyone working here feels supported and safe. The ICGS helpline is able to offer guidance and support to anyone who has witnessed or experienced bullying, harassment, or sexual misconduct. There are also other forms of support for staff in the House, including the Employee Assistance Programme. I am specifically mentioning all of these matters because it is probably the case that many people who work on the estate are not aware of the support and advice that's available to them and of the care that we all take about how they go about their everyday lives while in employment here. If anybody does feel unsafe, they should speak to their manager, contact the helpline, or consider using some of the other sources of support that are available. Everybody who works here should feel safe. I sincerely hope that these messages will be taken seriously, and of course most experienced members of Parliament are always very happy when those who work for them or in proximity with them come to them for advice or guidance on matters about which they might be concerned. Now, I appreciate that the Honourable Lady was making a very specific point, and I have explained that the point that she raised specifically is not a matter for the Chair, but it is a matter for the Chair and indeed all of us to have responsibility for the safety and well-being of everybody who serves this place. And I hope that I've been able to give her some reassurance. Thank you. I will now suspend the House for 2 minutes while arrangements are made for the next item of business. Order.
Order. Order. We now go to the 10-minute rule motion. Rachel Hopkins, who is participating virtually. Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to give people who have made representations about development plans the right to participate in associated examination hearings, to require public consultation on development proposals, to grant local authorities power to apply local design standards for permitted development, and to refuse permitted development proposals that would be detrimental to the health and well-being of an individual or community, and to make planning permission for major housing schemes subject to associated work starting within 2 years and for connected purposes. And I'd like to refer members to my register of interests. It's a privilege to introduce my first 10-minute rule motion on such an important issue that is affecting so many of my constituents in Luton South and people across the country. We need a bold plan to tackle the housing crisis, but the government's planning white paper will restrict local communities' ability to shape their own area, allow for the creation of poor quality housing through permitted development rights, and allow developers to sit on planning permission rather than build desperately needed, truly affordable housing. It amounts to nothing more than a developer's charter that restricts communities while benefiting wealthy developers. This bill would ensure that local communities' right to participate in the planning process at a local level and on individual applications is protected. This measure is vital, as the government's white paper intends on creating a zonal approach to local plans, weakening local authorities and communities' detailed oversight of the planning process. This represents a shift away from public engagement and scrutiny of individual planning decisions to applications, to engagement only at the overarching local plan stage, which greatly restricts and in many cases removes the rights of local councillors, local resident associations and local residents to shape or object to a particular planning application in their area. It seems like the government's solution to speeding up planning is to remove the right of local people and councillors from having a say in the planning process rather than tackling other obstacles. The government's plan to remove the voice of local communities has been opposed by a wide range of groups, from the Local Government Association to Civic Voice and the Town and Country Planning Association. The delivery of new, truly affordable homes must be pursued through a locally led planning system with public participation at its heart. Indeed, just last night, Luton Council unanimously passed a motion that emphasised that planning works best when developers work with the local community, and it called on the government to protect the right of communities to object to individual planning applications. And I would point out that even councillors from the government's own party supported this motion. The Housing Communities Local Government Select Committee, of which I'm a member, also recommended in the Future of the Planning System in England report that all individuals must still be able to comment and influence upon all individual planning proposals. This bill would reflect Luton Council's motion and the Select Committee's recommendation by legislating to ensure that people have the right to participate in development plans and associated examination hearings. The government also intends on ending the statutory planning notice requirement to inform local people through notices in local papers, on community notice boards, on lampposts, and potentially hard copies of documents, in favour of using just technology. The Select Committee heard about how local people want to continue to be able to comment on specific local planning applications, and that the proposal to drop the legal requirement to publish planning notices in local newspapers and the like would create a postcode lottery as to where that opportunity continues. This would undermine local democracy by creating barriers for those who do not have digital access, such as the elderly or those on low incomes. Instead, the Select Committee recommended retaining existing statutory notices for all local authorities, alongside using technology to make the planning process as accessible as possible. This bill would also expand the right to participate to include permitted development, which currently does not allow for objections from residents, and also seeks to allow local planning authorities to set local design standards for when an application is made for prior approval through the permitted development process. Constituents have also contacted me to raise their frustrations at how local planning authorities do not have sufficient power to oppose planning applications. And the HLG Select Committee has heard that permitted development rights weaken local authorities' ability to shape places and diminish community engagement in the planning process. A report the government commissioned into the impact of permitted development homes concluded permitted development conversions do seem to create worse quality residential environments than planning permission conversions in relation to a number of factors widely linked to the health, well-being and quality of life of future occupiers. Many members from across the House will have also heard of horror stories of where permitted development rights have allowed the creation of poor quality housing in their constituency. An example of Unity House in Luton, an office building converted through permitted development rights, houses families with children alongside a 4-lane inner ring road. This permitted conversion brought more people into an area that is within an air quality management zone due to traffic congestion. It was only allowed to happen because PDR bypasses necessary planning permission air quality regulations. And when the government's own former housing advisor, Ben Clifford, warned that the changes to permitted development risk creating the slums of the future, I have to agree. This bill allows local planning authorities to refuse prior approval if the development would be to the detriment of the health and well-being of an individual or the wider community, therefore preventing poor quality homes that are in inappropriate locations or lack adequate community infrastructure, such as shops, schools and parks. And I've seen in Luton children having to play football in the middle of the pedestrian area in the town centre as a consequence of a higher density of housing being created in former commercial premises in the town centre under PDR, but without any consideration of local amenities. The children in my town deserve so much better. Last year, Labour formally opposed the government's changes to PDR, which allowed for additional stories to be placed on existing developments such as flats and houses. It's clear that the measures in this bill are needed to prevent the creation of homes through PDR further damaging people's, including children's, health and well-being. The housing crisis will not be addressed through PDR's creation of poor quality housing and will certainly not be addressed while developers sit on planning permissions. The failure to ensure that sites with planning permission have been built on is a key driver behind the government's poor record on house building. According to analysis by the Local Government Association, more than 1.1 million homes granted planning permission in England in the last decade are yet to be built. As the LGA said, local plans are also not holding up the building of new housing, with more than 1 million homes on land earmarked for development by councils yet to be brought forward by developers for planning permission. Currently, the requirement is for the development to begin within 3 years of permission being granted. This allows developers to land bank, which means holding land and selling it in the future when its value rises. We need to incentivise developers to build. That is why this bill would ensure that planning permission for major housing schemes will only be granted on the condition that development begins within 2 years of planning permission being granted. This bill safeguards the interests of my constituents and many of the organisations that are deeply concerned about the government's planning proposals. It lays the foundation for a planning system that allows local people to shape their place and deliver good quality homes that promote health and well-being. Thank you.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no.
No, no, no.
Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in a bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tell us for the ayes, Taiwo Awatami and Mary Glindon. Tell us for the noes, Maury Rimmer and Jill Furness. Lock the doors.